Sophie Williams never imagined that a rainy Tuesday night in Auckland would be the moment her life would either end or begin again. "Son, we have nowhere to go," she whispered, her voice breaking as Leo slept in her arms, wrapped in a thin blanket on the wet pavement of Queen Street, until Emma Rutherford's imported sedan stopped in front of them, and a woman in an expensive coat stepped out with tears in her eyes. Support the channel by leaving your like and comment, and let's dive into our story. Sophie Williams, 30 years old, had been evicted from her 28-square-meter studio in Otahuhu 3 days ago. The landlord had been patient for 4 months, but patience has limits when rent doesn't arrive. She had worked as a cashier at the Woolworths in Newmarket, earning roughly 3,600 New Zealand dollars a month, a salary that barely covered the Auckland cost of living, but was enough to keep her and Leo fed and sheltered. That fragile balance shattered 2 months ago when Leo, her 5-year-old son, contracted pneumonia. 11 days at Starship Children's Hospital, 11 days of missing shifts, 11 days of mounting panic as her manager's texts went from concerned to cold to final. When Leo was discharged, pale and weak but alive, Sophie returned to work only to find her locker cleaned out and a termination letter waiting. No income, no family. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 23, leaving her utterly alone. And now, $7,200 deep in credit card debt from medications, taxi rides to the hospital, and accumulated bills. Her name was flagged on every credit bureau in the country. No landlord would take her. No employer would hire her with the gaps in her resume and the reference that damned her with faint praise. 3 nights on the street felt like 3 years. The first night, Sophie had tried a shelter in South Auckland, but it was full, the lines stretching around the block with families just as desperate. The second night, she'd slept in a park, but a security guard had moved them along at 2 in the morning, his face apologetic but firm. Tonight, the third night, she'd found this spot on Queen Street near Aotea Square, in front of a corporate building with lights still blazing on the upper floors. The rain had started an hour ago, cold and relentless, soaking through the thin blanket she'd wrapped around Leo. He was sleeping now, his small body curled against her chest, his breathing steady and soft. Sophie's tears mixed with the rain on her face. She didn't wipe them away. What was the point? "Son, we have nowhere to go," she murmured again, the words like a prayer or a confession. She looked up at the glowing windows of the building above her, imagining the people inside with their warm offices and their secure futures. People who would never know what it felt like to hold a sleeping child on a wet street and wonder if this was how their story ended. Emma Rutherford had left the Grove 20 minutes ago, her stomach full of premium cuts and her mind full of numbers. The business dinner had been successful, a potential partnership with an Australian developer, projected revenue of $15 million over 3 years, everyone shaking hands and smiling. She should have felt satisfaction, maybe even pride. Instead, she felt nothing. Emma was 36 years old, director of Rutherford Developments, a family construction company that generated roughly 120 million New Zealand dollars annually. Her father had built the business from nothing. Her older brother ran operations. Emma handled acquisitions and high-level negotiations, a role she'd stepped into with ruthless efficiency 2 years ago when everything in her life had collapsed. 2 years since Charlie died. 2 years since the accident. 2 years since she'd felt anything resembling a real emotion. She worked 16 hours a day because working meant not thinking. She'd divorced Daniel because being married to a grieving ghost was impossible. She avoided children, playgrounds, schools, anything that reminded her that she'd once been a mother and had failed at the only job that mattered. The Audi's headlights cut through the rain as Emma turned onto Queen Street. She was thinking about the acquisition proposal, running numbers in her head when she saw them. A woman sitting on the pavement, soaked through, a small child asleep in her arms. Emma's foot hit the brake before her mind registered the decision. The car stopped abruptly, the seatbelt catching against her chest. She stared through the windshield, her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. The boy, 5, maybe 6 years old. Dark hair, small hands clutching the woman's jacket. Charlie had been 6 when he died. Charlie's hair had been that same shade of brown. Emma's chest constricted, a physical pain sharp enough to make her gasp. She hadn't let herself think about Charlie in months. Work was her shield. But now, staring at this child sleeping in the rain, the shield cracked wide open. Emma pulled the car to the side of the road and turned off the engine. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs, trying to steady herself, but the shaking wouldn't stop. What was she doing? She should drive away. This wasn't her problem. Auckland was full of people in need, full of tragedies, and she couldn't fix them all. She couldn't even fix herself. But her hand was already reaching for the door handle. She stepped out into the rain, the cold water hitting her face and soaking into her designer coat within seconds. She walked toward the woman and child, her heels clicking on the wet pavement, each step feeling both inevitable and terrifying. Sophie looked up as the woman approached. Instinct made her pull Leo closer, protective, wary. Rich people didn't stop for homeless people unless they wanted to feel superior or take a photo for social media. Sophie had learned that lesson fast. But this woman wasn't holding a phone. She was just standing there in the rain, staring at Leo with an expression Sophie couldn't quite read. Grief, maybe, or shock. The woman's eyes were red-rimmed, her expensive coat already drenched. "Are you okay?" the woman asked, and her voice was soft, tentative, nothing like the condescending tones Sophie had expected. Sophie wanted to laugh. Was she okay? She was sitting on a street in the rain with her son, and no home, and no money, and no future. But she didn't laugh. She just looked at the woman, trying to figure out what she wanted. "We're fine," Sophie said, the lie automatic. "We don't need anything." Emma flinched, as if the words had struck her. She crouched down, bringing herself to Sophie's level, ignoring the puddle forming beneath her knees. "I'm Emma," she said, "and I think you do need something. Please, let me help." "We don't take charity," Sophie said, her voice harder now, defensive. She'd lost everything, but she still had her pride. It was the only thing left. "It's not charity," Emma said quickly. "My company maintains an apart hotel for construction crews. It's empty right now. You and your son can stay there tonight. Just tonight. Tomorrow you can decide what to do, but not here, not in the rain." Sophie stared at her, searching for the angle, the catch. There was always a catch. But the woman's face was open, desperate even, as if she needed Sophie to say yes more than Sophie needed the help. Sophie looked down at Leo, at his small face peaceful in sleep, at the blanket soaked through and useless. Her pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Not tonight." "Just tonight," Sophie said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "And we'll leave in the morning." Emma nodded, relief flooding her features. "Just tonight," she agreed, though something in her voice suggested she already knew it wouldn't be that simple. She stood and gestured toward the Audi. "Come on, let's get you both dry." Sophie rose slowly, her legs stiff and aching from hours on the cold pavement. She carried Leo carefully, shielding his face from the rain, and followed Emma to the car. Emma opened the back door, and Sophie climbed in, settling Leo on her lap. The interior of the car was warm, the leather seats soft, the air smelling faintly of expensive perfume. Sophie had forgotten what comfort felt like. Emma slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, the heater blasting warm air into the cabin. She glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting Sophie's eyes for a brief moment. "The hotel's not far," Emma said. 10 minutes. "Thank you," Sophie whispered, and the words felt inadequate, too small for what was happening. Emma didn't respond. She just drove, her hands steady on the wheel, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. The rain continued to fall, drumming against the roof of the car, and inside 2 women sat in silence, each carrying grief too heavy to name, each wondering if kindness could ever be enough to heal wounds so deep. The Nesuto Stadium Hotel and Apartments stood in the city center, a modern building with glass panels reflecting the streetlights. Emma parked in the underground garage and led Sophie and Leo through a side entrance, bypassing the main lobby. She didn't want questions, didn't want the night manager asking who these wet, exhausted people were. The apartment was on the 4th floor, a one-bedroom unit with a kitchenette, a small living area, and a bathroom with clean white tiles. Emma unlocked the door and stepped aside, letting Sophie enter first. Sophie stood in the doorway, taking it in. The space was simple, functional, designed for short-term corporate stays, but to her it looked like a palace. A real bed with clean sheets, a heater humming softly in the corner, a lock on the door. She carried Leo to the bed and laid him down gently, pulling the blanket over him. He stirred slightly but didn't wake. Sophie turned to find Emma standing near the door, her coat still dripping water onto the floor, her expression uncertain. "There are towels in the bathroom," Emma said. "And the fridge should have some basics. Milk, bread, eggs. Help yourself to anything. We'll be gone in the morning," Sophie said again, as if repeating it made it true, made this manageable, made it not charity. "No rush," Emma replied, though her tone was carefully neutral. "Get some rest. You've had a rough night." Sophie wanted to say more, wanted to ask why this woman was helping her, what she wanted in return, but exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She nodded, and Emma took that as her cue to leave. The door clicked shut softly, and Sophie was alone with Leo in a warm, dry room for the first time in 3 days. She walked to the bathroom, caught sight of herself in the mirror, and almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. Hollow eyes, tangled wet hair, skin pale and drawn. She looked like someone who'd been broken and hadn't yet figured out how to put the pieces back together. Sophie turned on the shower, letting the water heat up, and for the first time in weeks she allowed herself to cry properly, the sound muffled by the spray of water and the closed door. Emma didn't go home. She sat in her car in the parking garage for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe normally. Seeing that boy, Leo, had torn something open inside her, something she'd worked so hard to keep sealed. Charlie would have been 8 now, would have been starting year 3 at school, would have been obsessed with rugby or Lego or whatever kids loved these days. But Charlie was gone, and Emma had built her life around not thinking about it, around staying so busy that grief couldn't catch her. Tonight had been a crack in the armor. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and closed her eyes, but all she could see was Leo's small, sleeping face, so achingly similar to the face she'd kissed goodnight 1,000 times before the accident. Eventually, she started the car and drove to her penthouse in Parnell, a sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. She poured herself a glass of wine she wouldn't drink and stood at the window, watching the city lights blur through the rain until dawn. Sophie woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the unfamiliar softness of a real mattress beneath her. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was, and then it all came rushing back. The street, the rain, the woman in the expensive coat. Leo was still asleep beside her, his breathing deep and even. Sophie slipped out of bed quietly and walked to the window. Auckland stretched out below, the harbour glittering in the morning light, the sky tower piercing the cloudless blue sky. It was beautiful. It was cruel. This city held millions of people living comfortable lives while she and Leo slept on the street. She turned away from the window and went to the kitchenette, found bread and eggs in the fridge as promised, and made scrambled eggs and toast. The smell woke Leo and he sat up, blinking sleepily. "Mum?" he said, confused. "Where are we?" "Somewhere safe," Sophie said, bringing him a plate. "Just for today." Leo ate hungrily, swinging his legs off the edge of the bed. He didn't ask more questions. At 5 years old, he'd already learned not to expect stability. They'd moved 4 times in 2 years, each place smaller and cheaper than the last. Sophie watched him eat and felt the familiar weight of failure pressing down on her chest. She was his mother. She was supposed to protect him, provide for him, give him a childhood that wasn't defined by instability and fear. Instead, she'd failed at every turn. The knock on the door came at 9:30. Sophie tensed immediately, but when she opened it, Emma was standing there holding 2 takeaway coffee cups and a paper bag that smelled like fresh pastries. She'd changed clothes, now wearing tailored black trousers and a cream blouse, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She looked professional, put together, every inch the successful businesswoman, but her eyes still had that haunted look from the night before. "I brought breakfast," Emma said, holding up the bag. "Thought you might be hungry." Sophie wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain the boundary, but Leo had appeared beside her, eyes wide at the sight of the pastries. "Can we, Mum?" he asked, and Sophie didn't have the heart to say no. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. Emma entered, set the coffee and pastries on the small table, and crouched down to Leo's level. "Hi," she said softly. "I'm Emma. What's your name?" "Leo," he said, suddenly shy. "I'm 5. 5's a good age," Emma said, and something in her voice cracked. She stood quickly, turning away, blinking hard. Sophie saw it, recognized it. This woman knew loss. This woman understood grief. They sat at the table, Leo devouring a chocolate croissant, while Sophie and Emma drank their coffee in careful silence. "Why are you helping us?" Sophie asked finally, unable to stand the not knowing any longer. Emma set down her cup and looked at her directly. "I had a son," Emma said quietly. "His name was Charlie. He was 6 when he died, 2 years ago. Car accident." She paused, swallowing hard. "Last night, when I saw your son sleeping in the rain, I couldn't drive away. I tried to tell myself it wasn't my problem, but I couldn't. I don't know if I'm helping you or if I'm trying to fix something that can't be fixed. Maybe both." Sophie didn't know what to say to that. She reached across the table and placed her hand over Emma's, a simple gesture of shared pain. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She pulled her hand back gently and cleared her throat. "Tell me your story," Emma said. "How did you end up on Queen Street?" So Sophie told her everything. The job at Woolworths, Leo's pneumonia, the termination, the eviction, the debt, the impossible catch-22 of needing money to get a place, but needing a place to get money. She told her about her parents' death, about Leo's father who disappeared the moment she told him she was pregnant, about working 2 jobs before Leo was born and barely managing even then. She told her about the shelter wait lists and the judgmental looks and the bureaucracy that moved at glacial speed while real people suffered. She spoke without self-pity, just stating facts. But Emma could hear the exhaustion underneath, the bone-deep weariness of fighting a battle you were always going to lose. When Sophie finished, Emma sat back in her chair, processing. "You said you'd work anything," she said. "Did you mean that?" "I'm not looking for handouts," Sophie said quickly, defensively. "I'm not offering one," Emma replied. "I'm offering a job, administrative assistant at Rutherford Developments. $5,200 a month, formal contract, Kiwi saver, full benefits. You'd be organizing files, managing schedules, basic office work. It's not glamorous, but it's real work with real pay." Sophie stared at her, searching for the catch. "Why would you hire me? I have gaps in my work history. I have debt. I don't have any office experience." "Because you're a hard worker," Emma said simply. "Because you're smart enough to keep yourself and your son alive against impossible odds. Because I need someone organized, and anyone who can manage survival on the street can manage an office filing system. And because I believe in second chances." She paused. "But I need you to understand something. This isn't charity. If you take this job, you work like anyone else. No special treatment. You earn your paycheck. I want to pay you back for the hotel," Sophie said. "You can deduct it from my salary, installments, whatever works." "Deal," Emma said. "And there's a childcare center we use for employees, ECE standard, good staff. Leo can go there while you're working." Sophie felt tears prickling at her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She'd cried enough. This was a chance. Maybe the only chance she'd get. "When do I start?" she asked, her voice steady. "Monday," Emma said. "If that works for you." "It works," Sophie said. "Thank you, I won't let you down." Emma stood, smoothing her trousers. "I know you won't. Stay here until you find something more permanent. The apartment's empty anyway. No rush. She walked to the door, then turned back. Sophie, I'm not saving you. You're saving yourself. I'm just opening a door. What you do with it is up to you. After Emma left, Sophie sat at the table for a long time, staring at the empty coffee cup, trying to absorb what had just happened. Leo climbed into her lap, wrapping his small arms around her neck. "Do we get to stay here, Mum?" he asked. "For a little while," Sophie said, hugging him tight. "And then we'll find our own place. A real home." "Will Emma visit us?" Leo asked. Sophie smiled despite herself. "Maybe," she said, "if we're lucky." She looked out the window at the Auckland skyline, at the city that had nearly destroyed her, and for the first time in months she felt something that might have been hope. Monday morning arrived with clear skies, and Sophie's hands shaking as she buttoned the white blouse she'd bought from a charity shop on Saturday. It was slightly too big, but it was clean and professional, and it would have to do. She'd used the last of her remaining money to buy basic work clothes and shoes that didn't have holes in the soles. Leo wore his best shirt, the blue one that was getting too small but still looked presentable. They took the bus to the Rutherford Development's office in Newmarket, a sleek glass building near the shopping district. Sophie held Leo's hand tightly as they walked through the automatic doors into the air-conditioned lobby. Emma was waiting for them in reception, dressed in a sharp navy suit, her professional mask firmly in place. She smiled when she saw them, a small, genuine smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She led Sophie to the third floor, showed her the desk she'd be using, introduced her to the office manager, a brisk woman in her 50s named Patricia, who looked Sophie up and down with thinly veiled skepticism. Emma then took Leo to the childcare centre on the ground floor, a bright space with colourful walls and toys scattered across foam mats. Leo clung to Sophie's leg at first, uncertain, but one of the teachers, a cheerful Maori woman named Aroha, crouched down and offered him a toy truck, and slowly he let go. Sophie's first week was brutal, not because the work was hard, it wasn't. Mostly filing and data entry and scheduling meetings, but because every person in that office knew exactly who she was and how she'd gotten there. She heard the whispers in the break room, saw the sidelong glances, felt the judgment radiating from colleagues who'd worked years to get where they were, and resented this newcomer who'd been handed a job by the director herself. Sophie kept her head down and worked. She arrived 15 minutes early every day and left 15 minutes late. She organized filing systems that had been neglected for years, created digital databases to replace the chaotic paper records, streamlined the scheduling process that had been driving Patricia crazy for months. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for special treatment. She earned every dollar of her paycheck. Emma watched from a distance, careful not to show favoritism, but she noticed. She saw Sophie staying late to finish projects. She saw the way Sophie handled Patricia's passive-aggressive comments with quiet professionalism. She saw Sophie eating lunch alone at her desk because no one invited her to join them. And she saw Leo thriving in the childcare centre, his laughter echoing through the hallways when she passed by, his drawings taped to the walls, his sunny personality winning over even the most cynical staff members. 6 weeks into Sophie's employment, Emma found herself making excuses to stop by Sophie's desk, a question about a file, a clarification on a meeting time, excuses that were transparent, even to herself. The truth was that Sophie's presence in the office had changed something fundamental in Emma's carefully controlled world. For 2 years, Emma had moved through life like a ghost, present but not really there, going through motions without feeling. But Sophie was so vibrantly alive, so determined, so real, that being near her made Emma remember what it felt like to be human. It was terrifying and addictive in equal measure. One Thursday evening in late autumn, most of the staff had left for the day, and Emma found Sophie still at her desk, frowning at a spreadsheet on her computer. Emma paused in the doorway of the open plan office, watching the late afternoon sun cast golden light across Sophie's face, illuminating the concentration in her eyes. "You don't have to stay late every night," Emma said, walking over. Sophie looked up, startled, then smiled tiredly. "I know," she said, "but I'm almost done with this budget reconciliation, and I'd rather finish it tonight than leave it hanging." "Gee, Patricia's been impressed with your work," Emma said, perching on the edge of the desk. "She told me yesterday that you've accomplished more in 6 weeks than the last assistant did in 6 months. Sophie's cheeks flushed with pleasure. "Really?" she asked, and the vulnerability in her voice, the hunger for validation, made Emma's chest ache. "Really?" Emma confirmed. "You're good at this, Sophie. You should be proud." "I am," Sophie said quietly. "This job, this chance, it's everything. I won't mess it up." "You couldn't if you tried," Emma said, and then, before she could think better of it, "Have you eaten dinner? There's a good Thai place around the corner. We could grab something." Sophie hesitated, clearly torn between wanting to say yes and worried about crossing professional boundaries. "Is that appropriate?" she asked. "You're my boss." "I'm also the person who bought you coffee and croissants," Emma pointed out. "And I'm hungry, and I'm guessing you are too." "It's just dinner, Sophie. 2 people eating food. Nothing complicated." "Okay," Sophie said, saving her work and shutting down the computer. "Just dinner." But they both knew it was more than that, something shifting between them that neither was ready to name. They picked up Leo from the childcare center, where he was building an elaborate block tower with another little boy. He ran to Sophie the moment he saw her, hugging her legs, then noticed Emma and gave her a shy wave. Emma waved back, something warm and painful twisting in her chest. The 3 of them walked to the Thai restaurant, a small cozy place with wooden tables and the smell of lemongrass and chili in the air. They sat by the window, Leo between them, and ordered pad thai and green curry and spring rolls. The food arrived steaming and fragrant, and they ate while Leo chatted about his day, about the tower he'd built and the game he'd played, and the story Aroha had read about at Taniwa. Emma listened to him with an attention that bordered on desperate, absorbing every detail, every inflection. Sophie noticed, saw the hunger in Emma's eyes and understood. This woman wasn't just being kind. She was trying to fill a void that could never be filled. When Leo finished eating, he grew sleepy, resting his head on Sophie's shoulder. Emma reached across the table without thinking and gently brushed a strand of hair off his forehead. The gesture was so tender, so instinctive, that Sophie felt tears prick at her eyes. "You must have been a wonderful mother," Sophie said softly. Emma's hand froze, then withdrew. "I tried to be," Emma said, her voice rough, "but it wasn't enough. I couldn't protect him." "It was an accident," Sophie said. "You can't protect against everything." "I should have," Emma said, staring at her plate. "I was his mother. That was my job, and I failed." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with grief that hadn't dimmed in 2 years. Sophie reached across the table and took Emma's hand, holding it firmly. "You didn't fail," Sophie said. "You loved him. That's what matters." Emma looked up, meeting Sophie's eyes, and for the first time in 2 years, she let someone see the full depth of her pain. They sat there in the warm restaurant, hands clasped across the table, a sleeping child between them, and something profound and unspoken passed between them. Understanding, connection, the recognition that they were both broken in different ways, and somehow, inexplicably, that brokenness made them fit together. 3 months into Sophie's employment, on a Friday afternoon in early winter, Leo spiked a fever at the childcare center. Aroha called Sophie, who rushed downstairs to find her son flushed and glassy-eyed, his small body radiating heat. Panic seized Sophie immediately, the trauma of his pneumonia still vivid in her mind. She gathered him in her arms, her heart pounding, her hands shaking as she felt his forehead. "He needs to see a doctor," Aroha said gently. "His temperature's 39.2. Sophie nodded, already calculating. The after-hours clinic would cost money she didn't have saved yet. She'd have to put it on her slowly recovering credit. She carried Leo toward the elevator, and Emma appeared as if summoned, taking one look at Sophie's terrified face and Leo's feverish state, and immediately shifting into action. "My car's in the garage," Emma said. "I'll drive you to Starship now." "You have a meeting," Sophie protested weakly, but Emma was already guiding them toward the elevator. "The meeting can wait," Emma said firmly. "Let's go." Boom! They drove through Auckland traffic, Emma navigating with focused efficiency while Sophie sat in the back holding Leo, whispering reassurances she didn't believe herself. At Starship Children's Hospital, they were seen within 20 minutes, the pediatrician examining Leo thoroughly while Sophie gripped Emma's hand so tightly her knuckles went white. The doctor's verdict was a viral infection, common and not serious, requiring rest and fluids and paracetamol. Nothing like the pneumonia. Nothing life-threatening, but Sophie couldn't stop shaking even after they left the examination room, even after the doctor reassured her multiple times. Emma took them to the hospital cafeteria, bought hot chocolate for Leo and tea for Sophie, and sat with them until Sophie's breathing returned to normal. Leo, already feeling better with medication in his system, drank his hot chocolate and swung his legs happily. Sophie just stared at her tea, trying to hold herself together. "I'm sorry," Sophie said finally, her voice breaking. "I know I overreacted. It's just when he was sick before, when he had pneumonia, I thought I was going to lose him. I thought he was going to die, and it would be my fault, because I couldn't afford better care, because I worked too much and didn't notice the symptoms early enough, because I'm a terrible mother who can't even keep her child safe." The words poured out in a rush, all the fear and guilt and self-hatred she'd been carrying for months. Emma set down her own tea and turned to face Sophie fully. "You are not a terrible mother," Emma said, her voice fierce. "You are the best mother that boy could possibly have. You have fought for him every single day against impossible odds. You kept him fed and safe when you had nothing. You work yourself to exhaustion to give him a better life. That's not failure, Sophie. That's heroism." Sophie looked at her, tears streaming down her face now, and Emma's own eyes filled. "I'm so afraid of losing him," Sophie whispered. "He's all I have. If something happened to him, I wouldn't survive it." "I know," Emma said, and her voice broke. "I know what that fear feels like, and I know what it feels like when your worst fear comes true. When Charlie died, I stopped living. I just existed. I went through the motions, but I was dead inside." She paused, swallowing hard. "But being with you, with Leo, for the first time in 2 years, I feel like maybe I could live again. Maybe I could be something other than a ghost. You've given me that, Sophie. So please don't tell me you're not enough, because you're everything." They stared at each other across the cafeteria table, the noise of the hospital fading into background static, and Sophie saw Emma truly for the first time. Not the successful businesswoman, not the director with all the answers. Just a woman who'd lost everything and was trying desperately to find a reason to keep going. Sophie reached across the table and pulled Emma into a hug, awkward across the table but fierce and real. Emma hugged her back, burying her face in Sophie's shoulder, and for the first time since Charlie's death, she cried, not the silent tears she'd shed alone in her penthouse, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from the very core of her grief. Sophie held her and let her cry, one hand stroking Emma's hair, murmuring wordless comfort. Leo watched them with wide eyes, then reached out and patted Emma's arm gently. "Don't be sad, Emma," he said. "Mum always says crying helps the hurt come out." Emma pulled back, wiping her eyes, and managed a watery smile at him. "Your mum is very wise," she said. "Thank you, Leo." They sat there until Emma's tears stopped and Sophie's shaking subsided, and Leo finished his hot chocolate. Then Emma drove them back to the apartment Sophie was still staying in, the temporary arrangement having stretched into 3 months, because finding affordable housing in Auckland was impossible, and Emma kept saying there was no rush. Emma walked them to the door, lingered in the doorway. "Thank you for today," Sophie said, "for dropping everything, for being there." "Thank you for letting me," Emma replied, "for trusting me with this." They stood close enough that Sophie could see the flecks of gold in Emma's hazel eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from Emma's body. For a moment, something electric hung in the air between them, something that felt like possibility. Then Leo tugged on Sophie's hand, breaking the spell. "Mum, I'm tired," he said, and Sophie stepped back. "Good night, Emma," she said softly. "I'll see you Monday." "Good night, Sophie," Emma said. "Get some rest, both of you." She turned and walked away, and Sophie stood in the doorway watching her go, feeling something shift and settle in her chest, something that felt dangerous and inevitable and right all at once. The weeks that followed felt suspended in something fragile and precious. Emma found reasons to spend time with Sophie and Leo outside of work. A Saturday morning at the Auckland Domain, watching Leo chase ducks around the pond while they sat on a bench drinking coffee. A Sunday afternoon at the museum, Leo's hand in Emma's, as she explained the Maori artifacts with surprising patience. Dinners that became routine, the three of them at simple restaurants or sometimes at Emma's penthouse, where Sophie cooked in the pristine kitchen that Emma admitted she barely used. Slowly, carefully, they were building something that felt like family, though neither woman dared name it. But not everyone was pleased with the development. Margaret Rutherford, Emma's mother and president of the company board, appeared at Emma's office on a Wednesday afternoon without warning. She was 65, impeccably dressed in Chanel, her silver hair cut in a sharp bob, her expression carved from ice. She closed the door behind her and sat across from Emma's desk without being invited. "We need to talk about the Williams woman," Margaret said, dispensing with pleasantries entirely. Emma felt her spine stiffen. "Her name is Sophie," Emma said evenly, "and she's an excellent employee. Patricia speaks very highly of her work." "I'm sure she does," Margaret replied. "That's not the issue. The issue is that you're using this woman and her child as substitutes for Charlie. It's unhealthy, Emma, and it's becoming noticeable." "That's not what's happening," Emma said, though the accusation struck closer to truth than she wanted to admit. "I'm helping someone who needed help. That's all." "Is it?" Margaret leaned forward, her gaze sharp. "You've been spending weekends with them, taking them to your home. The staff is talking. The board is concerned about your judgment, about whether you're emotionally stable enough to be making major company decisions." "My personal life is my own business," Emma said, anger rising in her chest. "And my work hasn't suffered. You know that." "Your work is impeccable," Margaret conceded. "It always has been. But this situation creates optics we can't ignore. You're a director of a major construction firm. Having an employee, a woman you personally hired under questionable circumstances, becoming this intimately involved with your life, raises questions. What happens when you tire of this project? When the novelty wears off, you'll discard her and we'll have a lawsuit on our hands." "She's not a project," Emma said through gritted teeth. "She's a person, and I care about her." "That's precisely the problem," Margaret said, standing. "You're not thinking clearly. You're still grieving Charlie, and you're trying to fill that void with a ready-made family. It won't work, Emma. And when it falls apart, you'll be hurt. She'll be hurt. And the company's reputation will suffer. End this. Keep it professional or let her go." She left without waiting for a response, and Emma sat at her desk feeling like she'd been flayed open. The confrontation with Daniel came 2 days later. Her ex-husband showed up at the penthouse unannounced, using the key he technically wasn't supposed to have anymore. Emma arrived home from work to find him standing in her living room, his expression a mixture of concern and condescension that she remembered all too well. "We need to talk," Daniel said. Emma set down her briefcase and crossed her arms. "About what?" she asked, though she already knew. "About the fact that you're apparently playing house with some homeless woman and her kid," Daniel said bluntly. "Mum called me. She's worried about you. Frankly, so am I." "Margaret had no right to involve you," Emma said coldly. "We're divorced, Daniel. My life is no longer your concern." "It is when you're spiraling," Daniel shot back. "Emma, I know losing Charlie destroyed you. It destroyed both of us. But this isn't the way to heal. You can't replace our son with someone else's child." "I'm not trying to replace him," Emma said, her voice rising. "I'm trying to help someone who needs it. I'm trying to do something good in a world that took everything from me. Why is that so wrong?" "Because it's not real," Daniel said, his tone gentler now, pitying. "You're creating a fantasy where you get to be a mother again, where you get to have a family, but it's built on nothing. She's your employee. She's dependent on you financially. There's a power imbalance that makes this entire situation ethically questionable. And when it ends, and it will end, you'll be right back where you started, broken and alone. Emma felt tears burning in her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "Get out," she said quietly. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I hope you're right," Daniel said, moving toward the door. "But I don't think you are. I think you're heading for another crash, and I don't want to watch you fall apart again." He left, and Emma stood in her empty penthouse, his words echoing in her mind, planting seeds of doubt she couldn't quite uproot. At the office, the whispers had grown louder. Sophie heard them in the bathroom on a Thursday afternoon, two junior managers talking in voices they thought were private but carried through the thin stall walls. "Did you see Emma taking Williams to lunch again yesterday?" The first voice said. "It's embarrassing. She's so obvious." "I heard she gave her that job because Williams was literally homeless," the second voice replied. "Like a charity case. Can you imagine? No wonder she acts like she owns the place." "She doesn't own anything," the first voice said with a laugh. "She's Emma's little project. Give it a few months and Emma will get bored and move on. Then Williams will be back on the street where she belongs." Sophie sat frozen in the stall, her hands clenched into fists, humiliation washing over her in waves. A charity case? A project? Was that how everyone saw her? Was that what she actually was? She thought of all the time she'd spent with Emma, all the dinners and the weekends and the quiet moments of connection. Had it all been Emma's way of dealing with grief? Had Sophie just been a convenient replacement for a dead child, a placeholder until Emma healed enough to move on? The bathroom door opened and closed as the women left, their laughter fading down the hallway. Sophie emerged from the stall, stared at her reflection in the mirror, and felt something harden inside her. Pride, dignity, self-preservation, whatever you wanted to call it. She'd worked too hard to rebuild herself, only to discover she'd been someone's emotional crutch all along. She walked back to her desk, typed out a formal resignation letter, printed it, and placed it on Patricia's desk. Then she gathered her few personal belongings, wrote a brief note for Emma that said only, "Thank you for everything, but I need to do this on my own," and walked out of Rutherford Developments without looking back. Emma was in a meeting with contractors when Patricia found her an hour later, holding Sophie's resignation letter with a confused expression. Emma read it once, twice, not comprehending. Then she ran to Sophie's desk to find it empty, the computer logged off, the chair pushed in neatly. She grabbed her phone and called Sophie's number. It rang 5 times and went to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Panic rising, Emma drove to the apartment where Sophie had been staying, used her master key to get in, and found it empty, cleaned out. Every trace of Sophie and Leo gone. Emma stood in the middle of the vacant apartment, the silence crushing, and pulled out her phone. She typed a text message. "Please talk to me. Tell me what happened. Whatever I did wrong, we can fix it." She sent it and waited, staring at the screen. 5 minutes. 10. 15. The message was read, but never answered. Emma called again, and this time Sophie picked up on the 4th ring. "Don't call me again," Sophie said, her voice flat and final. "I'm grateful for what you did, but I'm not your project. I'm not a replacement for your son. I won't be the thing you use to feel better about yourself." "Sophie, that's not what this is," Emma said desperately. "Please, just let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," Sophie interrupted. "I heard what people were saying. I know what I am to you, and I should have known better. I have my own life, Emma. Leo and I will be fine. We always have been." "Where are you staying?" Emma asked. "Are you safe? At least tell me that." "We're fine," Sophie repeated. "Don't worry about us. Move on with your life. Find someone else to save." The line went dead. Emma called back immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. Sophie had blocked her number. Emma sank down onto the floor of the empty apartment, her back against the wall, and for the second time in a week she let herself cry. But this time there was no Sophie to hold her, no Leo to offer innocent comfort. She was alone again, and it felt like losing Charlie all over again, like the universe was reminding her that she didn't deserve happiness, didn't deserve connection, didn't deserve anything but the emptiness she'd been living in for 2 years. Sophie stood in the cramped room she'd rented in a boarding house in Henderson, Leo asleep on the narrow single bed they now shared, and tried not to let herself feel the loss. She'd found work at a small cafe in West Auckland, a family-owned place that paid $3,950 a month under the table and didn't ask too many questions. It was less than Rutherford Developments, but it was honest work, and it was hers, not given to her out of pity or guilt or grief. She'd survive, she always had. But late at night, when Leo was sleeping and the house was quiet, she let herself remember the feel of Emma's hand in hers, the sound of Emma's laugh, the way Emma looked at Leo with such desperate tenderness. She let herself remember and then forced herself to forget, because remembering hurt too much, and she'd had enough pain in her life already. 3 weeks passed in silence. Emma threw herself back into work with savage intensity. 16-hour days, impossible deadlines, anything to avoid thinking. But thoughts came anyway, intrusive and relentless. Margaret watched her with worried eyes, but said nothing. Patricia asked once if she'd heard from Sophie and accepted Emma's clipped no without pressing. Emma drove past the cafe in Henderson twice, parked across the street, watching Sophie through the window as she served customers with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Emma wanted to go in, wanted to apologize, wanted to explain that Sophie was wrong, that it wasn't about replacement or projects, it was about connection, about finding a reason to keep existing in a world that felt pointless. But she didn't go in, she just watched and then drove away, because maybe Sophie was right. Maybe Emma had been using her. Maybe the kindest thing Emma could do was let her go. On the 22nd day, Emma's therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who Emma had been seeing since the divorce, finally broke through the walls Emma had rebuilt. "You're punishing yourself," Dr. Chen said during their session. "You think you don't deserve happiness because Charlie died. You think caring for Sophie and Leo was selfish because it made you feel better. But Emma, that's not how this works. Connection isn't selfish. Caring for people isn't using them. You're allowed to heal. You're allowed to love again." "What if she's right?" Emma whispered. "What if I did make her into a project? What if I hurt her?" "Did you care about Sophie?" Dr. Chen asked. "Genuinely?" "Yes," Emma said without hesitation. "I care about her. I miss her. I miss Leo. I miss feeling like my life had purpose beyond just surviving." "Then tell her that," Dr. Chen said simply. "Stop deciding what's best for her and let her make her own choices. You say you respect her. Prove it. Give her the truth and let her decide what to do with it." Emma sat with that for a long moment, then nodded slowly. She had nothing left to lose. Emma walked into the cafe at 2:30 on a Saturday afternoon, when the lunch rush had ended and the space was mostly empty. Sophie was wiping down tables, her movements efficient and practiced, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked tired. She looked thinner. She looked beautiful. She saw Emma immediately and froze, the cloth still in her hand, her expression shuttering closed. "What are you doing here?" Sophie asked, her voice carefully neutral. Emma crossed the small cafe and stopped a respectful distance away, not crowding, not pressuring. "I came to apologize," Emma said, "and to tell you the truth. Can I have 5 minutes? If you want me to leave after that, I will, and I won't bother you again." Sophie glanced toward the back where the cafe owner, an elderly Vietnamese man named Min, was visible through the kitchen window. He gave her a small nod, indicating she could take a break. Sophie set down the cloth and gestured to a table in the corner. They sat across from each other, and Emma took a deep breath. "You were wrong," Emma said, "when you said you were a project, a replacement for Charlie. You were wrong. But I understand why you thought that, and I'm sorry I gave you reason to doubt." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When Charlie died, I stopped living. I went through the motions, but I was empty inside. Work was the only thing that made sense because it didn't require feeling. And then I saw you and Leo on Queen Street, and something in me broke open. You're right that it was about Charlie at first. Seeing Leo reminded me of what I'd lost. But Sophie, it stopped being about that almost immediately. Then what was it about? Sophie asked, her voice guarded but listening. It was about you, Emma said simply. About how you kept your dignity even when you had nothing. About how you loved your son so fiercely. About how you worked harder than anyone in that office and never complained. About how you made me remember what it felt like to be human. You weren't a replacement for anything, Sophie. You were yourself, and that was more than enough. Your mother said I was a project, Sophie said. Your ex-husband said you were emotionally unstable. People at work said you'd get bored and discard me, and maybe they were right. Maybe I was convenient because I needed you, and that made you feel useful. They were wrong, Emma said firmly, and I should have defended you better. I should have told them all to go to hell. I should have made it clear that what we had was real. But I was scared of what it meant. Scared of caring about someone again after losing Charlie. Scared that if I admitted how much you and Leo meant to me, the universe would take you away too. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, studying Emma's face, searching for deception or manipulation, but all she saw was raw honesty, vulnerability stripped bare. "What do you want from me, Emma?" Sophie asked finally, her voice soft. "I want to make you an offer," Emma said, "but not as your boss, not as someone who's trying to save you, as a partner." She pulled a folder from her bag and placed it on the table. "I've been working on something, a social housing fund through Rutherford Developments, affordable housing for low-income families. I want to make it real, but I need someone who understands what it's like to need that housing, someone who knows the system from the inside, someone smart and organized and passionate. I want you to co-manage it." Sophie opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. Projections, budgets, feasibility studies. "Emma, I don't have any qualifications for this," she said. "I'm a cafe worker with a high school education." "Then get qualified," Emma said. "There's a program for adults to complete NCEA. After that, you do a business administration degree. I'll pay for the education, but you earn it. You study, you pass, you prove you can do the work, and then you manage the fund as an equal partner. $5,200 a month while you're studying. After you graduate and take the management role, $7,800, plus 20% equity in the fund after 3 years. "Why?" Sophie asked. "Why would you do this?" "Because I believe in you," Emma said. "Because you're capable of more than you think. Because this fund needs someone like you to make it real, not just another corporate charity project that looks good on paper, but doesn't actually help people. And because I'm asking for a second chance, not as your employer, as your friend, as someone who cares about you and wants to be in your life, if you'll let me." Sophie stared at the documents, her mind racing. It was an incredible opportunity. It was also terrifying. "What if I fail?" she asked. "What if I can't do the coursework? What if I'm not smart enough?" "You survived on the street with a 5-year-old child," Emma said. "You kept him safe and fed against impossible odds. You're smart enough for anything. The question isn't whether you can do it. The question is whether you're willing to try." Sophie looked up, met Emma's eyes. "I need conditions," she said. "This has to be a real partnership, real contracts, real equity. I won't be anyone's charity case ever again." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Emma said, and she meant it. "You write the terms. I'll sign them." "And if it doesn't work?" Sophie asked. "If the fund fails, or we can't work together?" "Then we tried," Emma said, "and we'll figure out what comes next. But I think we can do this, Sophie, together." Sophie sat back in her chair, the folder in her hands, and felt something shift inside her. Fear still lingered, but beneath it was something stronger. Hope, possibility, the sense that maybe, just maybe, she could have more than survival. She could have a future. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "This is a big decision. Take all the time you need," Emma said, standing. "I'll be here when you're ready. And Sophie, I miss you, both of you. Whatever you decide about the fund, I hope we can still be in each other's lives. You matter to me, more than I knew how to say before." She left the cafe without waiting for a response, and Sophie sat alone at the table, staring at the documents, her heart pounding. That night, after Leo was asleep, she read through everything carefully. The fund was real, the terms were fair, the opportunity was legitimate, and Emma had given her control, given her agency, given her the choice. 2 days later, Sophie called Emma and said yes. The next 2.5 years were the hardest and most rewarding of Sophie's life. She enrolled in the adult education program and studied at night after long shifts at the cafe, determined to finish her NCEA quickly. Emma helped with childcare, picking up Leo from school on days Sophie had classes, becoming a steady presence in their lives again, but carefully, respectfully, never overstepping. Sophie completed her NCEA in 8 months, enrolled in a business administration degree at Auckland University of Technology, and threw herself into her studies with ferocious determination. She worked part-time for the fund during her degree, learning the construction industry from the ground up, attending site meetings, reviewing budgets, liaising with housing advocacy groups. Emma mentored her, but never patronized her, treating her as an equal partner, even when Sophie still had so much to learn. Leo thrived. He was 8 now, bright and funny and kind, enrolled in a good school on a needs-based scholarship that Sophie had applied for and won on merit. He called Emma Auntie Emma, and she took him to rugby games on weekends, taught him to swim at the local pool, helped him with his math homework when Sophie was drowning in her own assignments. The relationship between Sophie and Emma deepened into something profound and unshakable. Not romantic, though there were moments of electricity that neither acted on, but something equally powerful: chosen family, mutual respect. 2 women who had saved each other in the ways that mattered most. Sophie graduated with honors, her thesis on affordable housing policy earning recognition from the university. She wore her cap and gown on a sunny December morning, and Emma and Leo sat in the audience cheering louder than anyone else. The Rutherford Social Housing Fund launched officially 6 months later with Sophie as co-director. They built their first project in Mangere, 180 units designed specifically for low-income families, with on-site childcare, community gardens, and accessible public transport links. Sophie spoke at the opening ceremony, telling her story with unflinching honesty, and the audience of politicians, developers, and community leaders listened in silence. Emma stood at the back of the crowd, watching Sophie own that stage, and felt pride so overwhelming it brought tears to her eyes. Emma had changed too. She'd reduced her hours at Rutherford Developments, stepped back from the relentless grind that had been her coping mechanism. She saw Dr. Chen weekly, worked through her grief properly, learned to remember Charlie with love instead of anguish. She reconciled with Margaret after 8 months of difficult conversations, setting boundaries about her life and her choices. She never spoke to Daniel again, and that was fine. Some bridges were meant to burn. On a Monday morning in winter, Sophie and Emma stood together in the first completed unit of their second housing project, this one in South Auckland. A single mother named Rachel, 33 years old with 2 children, stood in the empty living room crying as the property manager handed her the keys. Sophie recognized the expression on Rachel's face because she'd worn it herself 3 years ago. Disbelief, relief, the fragile beginning of hope. "Thank you," Rachel whispered, clutching the keys like they might disappear. "You don't know what this means. We've been in emergency housing for 2 years. My kids, they'll finally have their own rooms. They'll have stability." "You earned this," Sophie said gently, the same words Emma had once said to her. "You qualified through the program. You proved you could manage a tenancy. This is yours because you deserve it, not because anyone's doing you a favor." After Rachel left to measure for furniture, Sophie and Emma stood in the empty unit, sunlight streaming through the windows, the smell of fresh paint still in the air. Emma turned to Sophie, studying her profile, the confidence in her posture that hadn't been there 3 years ago. "Do you remember Queen Street?" Emma asked quietly. "That night in the rain?" "Every day," Sophie said. "It feels like a lifetime ago, like it happened to someone else." "You've come so far," Emma said. "I'm so proud of you." "We both have," Sophie corrected. "You stopped running from your grief. You let yourself heal. That took courage." They stood in comfortable silence, shoulders nearly touching, and then Sophie's phone buzzed. A text from Leo's school about a permission slip she needed to sign. Normal, mundane, beautiful in its ordinariness. Emma smiled. "Want to grab lunch?" she asked. "There's a good fish and chips place near Leo's school. We could pick him up early, make an afternoon of it." "Sounds perfect," Sophie said, and they walked out of the empty unit together, locking the door behind them. They drove to the school, picked up a delighted Leo, who immediately launched into a story about the science experiment he'd done that morning, and went to the fish and chips shop, a simple place with plastic chairs and seagulls circling outside. They ate hot chips with vinegar, shared pieces of battered fish, laughed at Leo's jokes, and watched people walk past on the street. Sophie looked at Emma across the table, at Leo between them, drawing on a napkin with a borrowed pen, and understood something fundamental. Wealth wasn't money in the bank or property portfolios or business success, though those things had their place. Real wealth was this, a child who felt safe enough to be silly, a friend who showed up when it mattered, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. The knowledge that tomorrow would come and they would face it together, whatever it brought. It was simple. It was ordinary, it was everything. And there, in that fish and chip shop in South Auckland, with the smell of salt and grease in the air and seagulls crying outside, Sophie knew that she had found her way home. Not to a place, but to herself, to her worth, to the future she'd built with her own hands, and the help of someone who believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Dignity wasn't given. It was recognized, and when two strong women chose to build something together, there was no obstacle too large, no past too painful, no future too distant to reach. Yeah,